It's ad break time. The Beyond Solitaire podcast is proudly sponsored by Central Michigan University's Center for Learning Through Games and Simulations. And as usual, they are up to some amazing things. They recently concluded a successful campaign on BackerKit for Eyeball to Eyeball, a LARP about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Late pledges should be available soon. Also, just a quick plug for myself. If you want to support the show and help keep it going, please do go to patreon.com/beyondsolitaire, which pays for all of my hosting and subscriptions associated with the podcast and channel. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get on with the show. Hey, gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm here on the pod this week with a very special guest. This is Dr. Cosima Werner. She is a postdoc in cultural geography at the University of Kiel. How are you doing today, Cosima?
I'm doing very fine. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy that we've managed to make this work across many time zones because you are in Germany right now.
Right? It's
But
noon for me. It's early morning for you.
don't worry, normal for me. You study America and Americans. So could you give us some background on that and how that started in your academic life?
Well, this is a longer story. So I've always been interested in geography. So geography is my background. I'm a geography by training. I did my undergrad and master's program in geography. And the first time I've been to the US was in 2012, and I did an exchange semester in Minnesota, which was different. But I went also to Detroit, and Detroit became my favorite place to be. And still is. So I'm very excited to be back in Detroit by end of the month, which is great. However, Detroit is fascinating for me as a geographer because you are in the city and you wonder what happened in that city. And this was in 2012, before the city declared bankruptcy. So I'm now seeing the development of that city, and there's so much ongoing on social inequalities that is in your face. It's so much showing how space and inequalities are connected. And back in the day, I was focusing on urban gardening, and as many people may know, Detroit is a perfect spot for urban gardeners. So I've done this, and then I realized that urban gardeners have a problem with convenience stores, which makes sense when you consider only the food consumption and the products that they serve to the communities. However, going to a convenience store is also being in a social interconnection with the people, and the people dealing with the issues that they're facing on their daily basis, and they use convenience stores on so many different levels. However, I then focus on convenience stores and spent 7 months in convenience stores in Detroit and Chicago, and did ethnographic research, meaning participatory research and interviews. And yeah, this was my dissertation actually. And then, being confronted with the aspect of race so much, I was interested in how I could continue the aspect of race, but looking more into the German context. And this is what I am now doing. And this is where the board games are coming in. Yeah.
I love it. All right, just a quick convenience store question, just because it's so much a part of American culture. Then we can get to board games. So, how do you participate in an ethnographic study of convenience stores? Like, do you just go like eat the hot dogs and the bad pizza like everybody and hang out, or do you have to be more academic about it than that?
No. So one person once suggested me I should rent a car and park in front of the convenience store and be able to escape at any time. Well, I'm a white female person, so I'm seen, I can hide my identity or anything. And this is, but I'm a stranger. Being a stranger in ethnographic research can have some meaningful. It's a meaningful position. It can mean you have advantage, like you are a stranger, people trust you because you're a stranger and you're leaving with all the secret that they give you, or you are seen as an outsider and you never come close to them. So both of it happens at the same time. So some people like you, some people don't. However, doing it means like being in the store, having conversation with the people. Uh, I've been to people's home, and in Detroit, I spent a lot of time at the parking lot in front of the convenience store, and I went with the people to events, to music events and stuff, and as soon as or as long as they were comfortable having me around, I was comfortable with them as well. And yeah, we had a lot of exchange of thoughts and minds and cultural exchange. And yeah, that's it.
That's really cool. Okay, so it sounds like your experiences with convenience stores made you interested in the issue of race and how it impacts our spaces and our kind of little smaller cultural groups. So, how did that interest awaken for you? And what is it in America that made it happen?
So America. Oh no, I go from the German perspective. Germany has a very different position and very different debates on race and the meaning of race. And the discussion heated up in 2021 or 2020 in the aftermath of the George Floyd protests that also occurred in Germany. So there was a lot of protesting against police violence, and also a shift in the debate, like more and more Afro-German people raised their voices and said, this is happening to us as well. Maybe not as brutal when it comes to police violence, but it happens here on the daily basis as well. Racism is part of our everyday experiences. Um, and this is a very powerful voice that these people make. But still, there's this denial of, oh, we are not in America. This is different. Look at America. It's even worse in America. So it's part of the American social DNA, you know. But using this comparison, you always deny that this is existing for us, or we don't have to handle it because look at the Americans, it's worse there. I'm like, this is not very nice, and it shies away the problem that we have. And I'm using actually a lot of the American debates to see how can we transfer this to the German context. So I use the terms of whiteness. I use the terms of white fragility, and I'm very much influenced by a lot of American scholars to see how this is transferable to the German context. Because what we also saw in the debate on racism in Germany is that there was a transaction of the concept of whiteness and racism one-to-one from the American context to the German context. But the empirical insights are missing. The empirical research is somehow missing. Germans tend to use research on migration or people with migration backgrounds. We even have different terms. So, but they always shy away to touch their own nose and say, like, how's the German population? Like, we have very difficult terms that I'm not like to use, so I try to avoid it. But how is the society that is living in Germany also participating or opening up for new people coming in? And migration is a story of Germany, so it always existed. Interestingly, we have there's a statistics on the German population count. It's governmental statistics, and before the 1990s, they even didn't consider foreigners listed in their statistics. So they started after that to have terms like foreigners in the third generation or foreign-born, or it was kind of difficult connotation that we use. And I think whiteness is not so much covered in research at all in Germany. And we are always pointing on other people. So there's a lot of othering. So they don't integrate. They don't speak the language. They don't come up with the standards to reach in when it comes to income, educational levels, and so on. It's always they, and I'm not a fan of this. So I thought about how do we, as me, I am a white person, a white middle class person. So I can, when I say we, I I referring to German people who, where I'm the norm, I would be considered the norm. I would be considered the standard. So when I say we, I mean these people that are considered the standard in the German society.
Yeah.
So, and to research this, I focus on hobbies, and the hobbies that I'm looking at are board games and hiking.
Okay, so basically like pretty white hobbies if we're being very stereotypical. Although obviously in the American board game scene, we're really trying to make that change. So, what drew you to hobbies as a way to kind of get at whiteness and as a way to study it?
So we have a lot of studies that tell us that we have a lot of barriers in school education, and how they are selected, and how segregation is going on. We have also studies on segregation in cities. Um, and and these studies, they're also always problematized. So the segregated areas are problematized as being very poor, where social statistics are relatively poor considered to other areas, and so on, as same with educational levels. Um, and I'm like, yeah, but there are also daily practices or spheres of the daily life where we don't have exchange with people of different cultures or backgrounds or social backgrounds. So the diversity is missing in a lot of bubbles. So I'm referring to the term of bubbles. That is somehow a social space where people meet. And I'm using hobbies because officially everybody could join a hobby. Everybody can choose their own hobby. When we read Pierre Bourdieu, then we know it's a distinction of your social class and so on. So it's even more. It tells you where you are in your social position. But this understanding is not so prevalent in the hobbies itself. Like everybody says, like, oh, everybody can join, everybody can come to our board game night at that meeting at that cafe or whatever. So everybody's like super open, and I'm like, yes, you're promoting an openness, but on the same way, you are very homogeneous. The heterogeneity is missing. The diversity is missing. The diversity of perspectives are missing so many times. And I'm like, yeah, but everybody could join. So why isn't that people, you know, like to stay with their own people of their own kind? So
Because I would say that that's a conversation that board gamers on all levels of the hobby, not just up at academia, have been having. Like, well, everybody could come. The meetup's public, so this must be self-selecting. Like maybe other people just don't want to play board games, or this happened. I'm a woman in board gaming, right? So it's like maybe women just don't want to play board games. Maybe women just aren't interested in the kind of stuff board games are about. But I mean, if you go to larger conventions or look at other parts of the scene, that's definitely not true. So how do we end up with an inclusive yet exclusive situation in our hobby?
this is a historical perspective, I think. On one, so let's frame it differently. When I use the term of a bubble, so we can choose bubbles, we can go to different bubbles, we can leave bubbles, and so on. And we do this all the time. So people changing hobbies all the time. Yeah. Some stay, some don't. And it's because, and hobbies are a bubble where we have positive experiences that you love, that you have passion for, that you enjoy so much, and that you're giving, you're investing time, you're investing money, you are enthusiastic about it, and so on. So it's a very positive thing. As soon as you don't like the people anymore, you leave, you go out. Or as soon as that's the perfect thing. It's different with schools. So it's a voluntary practice. You do it because you love it. And when you love it more and more, you even become more like of these specialists that we have in the scene. So I think there is a making of such bubbles. And these makings could be rules or customs or rituals or, a way of language, a way of social capital, a thing of cultural capital and economic capital and so on. So there's a kind of making of such bubbles. And somehow new board gamers are entering these bubbles. So I talk to board gamers. I've been to various conventions. I've been to private board game groups. I've been on the board game cruise for 4 days and so on. So I've been to various things for this research to see like how do you become a board gamer. So the story is usually the same. Maybe it's like, oh, my parents, they had this closet full with board games and we used to play a lot, and my granny and so on, they played with us a lot. And then there's somehow a gap because then they become adults or teenagers, and then they may lose the interest, or they have their friends with whom they can play magic cards or with whom they play extensively other games, whatever. Usually Settlers or Catan is always mentioned as a turning point for most of the interview partners. This is where everything changed. And Settlers of Catan, or as it now called Catan, is that the scene changed so much and the publishers opened up for adults as a new group that they could target on. But we can look at the making of such bubbles. And the making is like that we have in Germany Spiel des Jahres, Game of the Year, which was announced a week ago. Or in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of these institutionalization of the scene. So we have the Spiel as at the fair. We have the Spiel des Jahres. We have various magazines that came up in the late 90s, late 70s and early 80s. We had the play by post, play by mail games as well. That's the Purple Revue, one of the first fan magazines, was from this development, same as in the US. So Aaron Trammell, he talks about the same processes in the US, but he says it's much earlier. Like he starts in the 50s, basically, with this wide flight to suburbs, with the war game scene and the model train scene. I see some connection to the model train scene in Germany, not so much to the war game scene, because war games were not so much welcomed or promoted in after the World War II period in Germany. So and many people who have been active in the gaming scene in the 70s and 80s are coming from the peace movement. So there was some resistance. So it's very much like this. It starts way later than in the US, or it skips some parts, maybe like this. But games have always been around, like in every culture. I think there's no culture that never developed any games. But yeah, so it started much later, and this starts like in the 70s, and then with the changes in the genre of the games, with the Euro games or the German tabletop games, it's changed so much and created so much more community. And then with the online presence of board game geeks and so on, it's developed even, or it became much bigger and more diverse. So we have to ask this question of diversity is a new question to the community. And I'm very excited to be in the middle of it to see how this is going to develop.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you are, you mentioned you went to game nights, you went to people's homes, you went on cruises. So are you playing or are you only observing the games?
So I'm playing, but I'm not a board gamer, I have to admit. So my collection of board games is very limited. It's like if it would be 20, it would be already, would be a lot. But the most games I got in the last year, actually. So people make them as a present to me, so I get them. Or I was at the Berlin convention recently, so I bought two new games. And my brother is actually sometimes playing, but he has also a small collection of maybe 30 games. But so I became his expert now because I'm now dealing with the new releases and new published games. So I know, oh, let's check this out. And oh no, this is too complicated for me. So choose a different one. So we have more conversations on board games than I ever had in my family. Yeah. So
Are
I'm
you
not a board
sure
gamer.
you're not a board gamer?
I'm not. So I made some jokes. So I've talked to one board gamer. He has like 150 plus games, but he's selling a lot of games. So he's one of my interviews, and I keep him updated on how I develop as a board gamer, which was like that I was sitting at my table and learning the rules of of a game, and I invited people to my home to play with me the games. But the complexity of the game is very low. So I
Isn't that
tried Spirit. I tried Spirit Island. I'm sorry, it's too hard for me. It was 3 hours questioning of what can I do now? How do I can play this now? And what the heck? And do I have to do this right this? And I'm like, yeah. So I have to develop more and more, and would have invest much more time uh, into it to become a board gamer. But I have my own hobbies. I have different hobbies that are white too. So
All right, so here's the question then. When you are asking people questions about the board gaming hobby, to what extent do they know that you're interested in talking
Mm,
about gaming and whiteness, or do you just ask like
mm,
generic questions and see what they say and pull information from that?
mm. So this is a good question. So whiteness has using the term of whiteness has a tendency to explode the entire conversation.
Yes, that's what I
So
want to know.
people can have the understanding that I'm researching racism, or even worse, that I would call them as a racist, what I'm not doing. So, and this has a potential for explosion. And if an interview is taking place with such presumptions on what I'm going to talk, the entire interview is invalid. I can't use it, or it might be, to have this. I have discussions with my interviews on, how appropriate it is to exoticize people, like in the game of Bora Bora, or how appropriate it is to have colonial practices in Santa Maria or Puerto Rico, Mombasa, you name it. There's so many around. So I have this discussion within the interviews,
Mhm.
yes, but this is coming up after a while. So usually it does differently. Um, and what I say, and this is very much true, I'm interested who is in the hobby. And then who is in the hobby is also the question who is not in the hobby. And why is that? And then you have a lot of discussions, or people say like, oh, they come from a culture where they don't play. I'm like, I'm not so sure. Or women are not interested in playing because it's too, I don't know, you know these stereotypes maybe better than I do, but there are a lot of stereotypes of, but always like, oh, they don't. And instead of, oh, we are not open enough, or we have created a space where people might sense that whiteness is convenient, or
Mm.
that being white is an entrance point somehow of like. So, and this is I work with the concept of Sarah Ahmed, the phenomenology of whiteness, where she's actually stating that people create a social space where they have a high social motility, which is a bodily ability to move freely and confident, somehow confident in such spaces, in new spaces. It's a difference. and she's making this point in her article. When a person of color is in a space of a lot of white people, it feels different for them. And for a white person, I feel it also feels different with the presence of people of color, or people, I assume they could be Jewish, or people who could be, different. We have this with men's talk in the locker room. It's different when women come into such spaces. So, and this is what the argument basically is of Sarah Ahmed, to point out that, for social orientation and for it's easier in the daily on the daily basis. It's easier to have such space where I don't have to deal with irritations that might be very subtle. So nobody's saying, "Oh, I don't like to have to hear people of color." This is not what they say. But there is a subtle notion which might be in senses and feelings and how to communicate with others. And that's very interesting because I'm white, and the interview partner that I have, most of them are white. So as soon as for instance, I've been to the German Masters Cup. There were 38 teams, I think, and each team consists of 4 players. 18% of them were women. So not every team had one woman in their team. And there were some people of color, a handful. And I approached them. I've talked to them. I've played with them. I went to their home and I played with them. It was a very lovely night. And yeah, so we have this discussion a lot. I have it with them a lot, especially how they feel in such spaces. And it's very interesting. And these are people of color that are not necessarily black, but they sometimes think, "Oh, am I not white?" So I'm like, well, in the German context, you might be othered because they have a background that is not European. So
Yeah, so it sounds like what we're kind of getting at is that people find it more convenient sometimes to not have to be considerate of others. And so when you have somebody join your group who you feel like you have to be sensitive to their feelings or mindful of what you say in a way that maybe you didn't think you had to in the locker room with all the bros, like suddenly people just kind of want to avoid that.
yeah, and I think it's for when your hobby is about joy and not about irritation, not to think about so board gamers have a tendency to focus on the board games and the mechanics. So the social interactions are sometimes very limited. So I know people that even don't know other people's name even after the second evening at the private home. And when we go from this, so this is very interesting. I think it is super interesting to leave strangers to your home, and most board gamers play at their homes. So how do you decide to let people in your home? So I have one female interview partner. She is considering how she is dealing with this. So she has a daughter. She is a single mom, and she loves board gaming, but she is more carefully on how she's organizing the gaming night at her space, at her private space, and she's thinking about the security of her child. So no other interview partner, especially not the men, ever mentioned such issues. So, but this aspect of security and having strangers at your home, for most people, my home is my castle. It's about trust and familiarity and trustworthiness. So, and this is very subtle. So trust is a very interesting concept, I think, to think about, because it's so irrational. So we have made experiences in our life that we barely can recall that tell us why we mistrust someone, or why we are suspicious about someone, or why we like someone or not. It's we fell in love easily to people and trust them with everything. And in the retrospective, we always can say, oh, trust wasn't reasonable to give because there was something, but we do trust people all the time. In the supermarket, in the train station, in the buses, and our work colleagues, our families and friends. So trust is very interesting. And when you think about who's allowed to be in your private space at home, is very interesting. So you have this dimension, but then there's also this other dimension which I really appreciate about board gaming, is that your personal background does not matter so much. Meaning, if you have a political controversial perspective on, you might be, right-wing person or very conservative, and you're sitting with a liberal person at one table, you may not know because you all focus on the board game and you leave. So to the board game conventions, for instance, I've been by my own, which is interesting to be there by yourself because, promoters won't explain you the game because you're by yourself. But the last day I went with a person who is in a difficult mental state at the moment. And he agreed to join with me, and it was perfect. So we played Botanicus, a new game, and it didn't matter. So I asked for the people's name who joined us to play. So we were 4 people in the end, and it was a lot of fun. And nobody asked about his mental state, which is problematic at the moment for himself. Like, it's not problematic that the people didn't ask, but it's problematic that he is in this situation. But nobody cared. Nobody asked for. And this is also a good thing. And in the board gaming scene, we have a lot of people who are neurologically diverse, who deal with autism or other things. And what I experienced at the board game cruise with like 250 people, there was no flirting. And for me as a woman, this was interesting. It's not that I'm always engaged in flirts, but where you didn't have to convince someone with your appearance or with your thoughts or with your minds or world perspective. You didn't have to convince someone to like you, which is somehow interesting, I think. And so it's social and unsocial in the same time. And this is a very interesting dynamic, I think, that the board game scene is offering. So, and it's open and closing also in the same moment. So it seems to be contradictory, but somehow it fits together.
Oh, that's really interesting to think about. Actually, I often recommend board games to people who are socially anxious because it's like, well, you don't have to do anything but play the game if you don't want to. But at the same time, some of my very best friends now that I actually do share confidences with are people with whom I have played games for a long time. So in your chapter that I fumbled through as well as I could, board games create a sense of family.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get that kind of family feeling if you maybe don't even know the next person's name or don't necessarily care about people's personal lives when you play?
Yeah, this is interesting. And I think this is this sense of, there's this German term, Geborgenheit, meaning there's this warm feeling of, oh, everybody is so nice and everybody, is respecting you and so on. So at this board game cruise, for instance, I have this one interviewee. I interviewed him after the board game cruise, and he organized a board game convention, a little one, and he's like all about it. Like, he's super enthusiastic, and this enthusiastic feeling is carrying him through for at least for a few weeks. It's like it's resonating with him, as Hartmut Rosa would call it. So it's resonating in the way that he's like super enthusiastic about it. And this is also connected to the people of the atmosphere, to So he like what got him very much was that he was considered as someone explaining board games. So he will become I don't know how you say this in English, Erklärbär. So he's a explaining bear at the convention, and
So it
uh,
basically gives him a sense of importance because people rely on
yes,
him to teach and to
yes,
lead.
and this
Yeah.
and this is what teachers also experience a lot when they feel like, oh, they understood what I said, and then they tell you, oh, you did it very well. So he was recruited for the next board game cruise to be the one who's going to explain the board games, and he recalled that people always said like he's very good at it, and this is, so I wouldn't say mansplaining, but I now do. So men explaining the world to someone is many times it's the men. So but many men are also in the board games. I don't want to dismiss the females in the hobby that do great work and also explaining other people games, but there's this positive energy that they experience, that they appreciate it, that they are seen for the qualities that they have, and that they can use their qualities in their hobby. So some might be very good at designing board games, others are very good in explaining them, and so on. Others are very good in bringing people together, so they have different skills that they can use in various formations. So, and this positive energy that they have with other people is very important, to have this sense of Geborgenheit, to have this sense of familiarity, which is familiarity is a part of trust. Being familiar with the settings, with the practices, with other people, and so on, is very important to have um, this ability, to organize a convention, to be confident enough to be welcomed in the scene, and then this can easily lead to the sense of we are a family. And the board game cruise, they had a shirt in their shop. I don't know if they still have it, that says "We are family," and nobody was wearing it on the cruise, but there was this sense of familiarity and being with people of your own kind. So it was the same with the family. Family is the ideal perspective of a family, is that the people are of their own kind, who are supportive, who encourage you to do things, and so on. It's a very ideal and romantic way of family. It has nothing to do with the realistic sense of family that a lot of people experience. That family members can be also very challenging and critiquing you all the time and bullying you, or you can have bad experiences, families, and so on. So it's a very ideal and romantic way that they from of a family that they use for their hobby.
So basically, we have people who maybe are not wanting to even necessarily share too much of their personal lives in other environments, getting affirmation and positive feedback from what they're able to contribute to board gaming. So I can teach a game. I have the coolest game. I'm going to bring it, and everybody's going to play it with me. I'm good at games, and so when I play really well, people give me a high five after and say that was a great move. And so there are some people who are constantly getting that, like, yes, these are my people. Board game people are my people vibes from board gaming all the time. I would say that happens for me a good chunk of the time as well. But when we think about people like us, I kind of think of it as board game people or teachers. And I would say that just to kind of clarify before we get into talk about how this always ends up being so many white people, like, do board gamers perceive people of their own kind, like, well, anybody who likes board games can play through? Do they perceive themselves as inclusive?
Yes, they do. So I have one interviewee. He is a journalist. He's a journalist in the south of Germany, and so I'm not naming any people because they're my interview partners, so I keep them anonymous.
Sure.
Although you might find them easily and so on, but this is what people can do on their own, and might think if I was talking about them or not. However, he was talking about his his crowd that is coming together weekly on a weekly basis in his in not his but in a family cafe where they play. And I asked him, who's coming to this cafe, and he says, oh, normal people or random people, like everybody is coming. So you have people with special interests, like autistic people. You have a lot of people who come from mathematics fields or informatics or in computer studies and so on. So a lot of academics and a lot of people from natural science. So I'm a talkative person, so I'm not a good fit for the academic, to represent the academics in the field. And then he's saying like, and then you have, and then he's saying, it's very funny. And then he says like, oh, and there are two women. They are very normal women, very normal people. They also come. I'm like, yeah, okay. So this is interesting. But if you think of who is listed or who is not listed, it's very interesting. So he's listing a lot of academics, a lot of men, and then he's also said, oh, there are also two women who are very normal, apparently, and autistic. So there's a bunch of people who's not coming. And I see this, like a lot of board game. I see, yes, there are a lot of men. Yes, a lot of people have an academic background, and a lot of them in natural science or computer science, tech studies, and so on. So there is somehow a connection to this. Actually, you also have a lot of people who work with children or who are working in church, who work in community services or social work. This is also a big group that is basically not considered, but there's a bunch of people who's interested in board games as a social instrument for bringing people together, or helping people develop social skills and so on. There's a lot of these people, and there's a lot of discourses, also academic discourses, of the meaning of games in learning social skills, for instance. But so this interview partner, coming back to him, would say, yeah, we are very open, it's a very diverse group. And I would somehow agree, yes, it's somehow a very diverse group, but somehow it's not a very diverse group. And this changes immediately as soon as you come to the organizational levels. So if you look at who is podcasting, who is blogging, who is vlogging, who is organizing conventions, who are the board game designers, who are in the jury of all the awards that exists, who is presenting a new prototype, who is on stage. And the board game convention, there was a pub quiz. So there were several podcasters formed up in teams, and they were competing against each other. And then there were a lot of questions. So, like, who won the Game of the Year award twice, or who, whatever. So all these kind of scene questions, but none of these questions ever covered a female. So it's nobody asked for who was the publisher of Wingspan or whatever, so because they don't know. And it's so many times, it was very interesting at the Berlin Convention, and I think there is a live stream of this. There was a debate on the hobby, of the inside of the hobby. And someone asked, "Oh, we need a female woman." Went up to the microphone and asked the plenum for more representation and diversity in the representation. And then the discussion started. Oh yeah, and there are females, and then blank. So someone who was on stage couldn't name a female person who's big in the entire field. So, but everybody can name a ton of men who won multiple awards and so on. And if you look, and this is what I've done yesterday, which is very interesting, to look on the nominees and the award winners of the Spiel des Jahres. since it existed. The first award was given, I have to check it. The first award was given to Susan McKinley in 2011, and this is relatively late. So
Yeah.
it's continues like this. Yeah, if you look on who is doing the revisions on board games, in if it's online or in magazines and so on, there isn't a lot of diversity, to be
Yeah.
honest. It's different on the conventions. Yes, I totally agree. You have more people of color, and you have homosexual people who you have, and so on. There's a lot of stuff going on. But in Germany, it's also very German centered. So German speaking centered. So Germany became such an important market for board gamers internationally that a lot of international designers look at the German market, but the German market's not so much looking on other spaces. And then board games like Puerto Rico become very popular elsewhere, like in the US and in Canada. And all of a sudden, there's a Jason Perez saying, well, there's some difficulties with the games. And did you ever think about the colonial, the reproduction of the colonial practices, not only references but practices that appear in the game? And the game was existing for 20 years, and nobody ever cared about it, or not so prominently as recently, or like in the few years. And this is because of the more international market. I've interviewed someone. He's a German board game designer, but he lives in Indonesia. He lives in Jakarta, and we talked about the Indonesian board game scene. And I also had contact with a board game designer, a female. She created a game, Kota Tua. Kota Tua means old city quarter, which is a colonial city quarter in Jakarta. So actually, I have an interest in Indonesia very much. So if I'm not in Detroit, I'm in Indonesia. So, however, we were talking about the scene there, and they are looking at the German market and the Eurogame styles, and they're copying it. And yeah, this is very interesting, I think, how they dealing with, when you have such a game like Kutatua, you are dealing with colonial narratives very much. And how do they reproduce this or change it, or how this changing is very interesting. It's so completely fascinating, but it's never going to be seen in the German market ever, or maybe in 10 years. But
Yeah.
there's so much more going on internationally. It's interesting.
Well, it's really interesting that you bring this up because I feel like a lot of times when we talk about Euro games in America, games that are kind of the more German style stereotypically, that often do have these colonial themes that are considered insensitive over here. People say, oh, well, just Europeans view it differently. The Europeans' perspective is just different. To what extent is that changing, if at all, in the wake of interactions with other markets?
So there was one incident last year at the German Board Game Masters Cup in Bad Nauheim. And I've been there. And one of the games that was played was East Indian Companies. And yes, this has very much a colonial continuancy and practices and so on. So there are a lot of aspects that are problematized. And for me as a researcher, it's my task to problematize and criticize such continuancies. I cannot say, oh, it's not a problem. It's not my positionality. But actually, one of the participants, he wrote his master's thesis on board games. And in Germany, we have this huge debate if board games should become a cultural heritage. If so, it would mean some benefits for the designers and so on. And so we have this debate. And in his master's thesis, he was also pointing or mentioning the aspect of colonialism that appears in a lot of German published games. And he was critical about it. And he sent to the organizers of the Masters Cup, he sent his master's thesis to say, like, you may think about when you choose the games, because it's not a vote of, players vote the games, but there's a committee who's selecting a team, and they are talking back to clubs, to board game clubs, to think about what game could be played, which is a good fit. So it's up to them to choose the games. It's not, it's not, oh, the crowd selected this game or whatever. It's not like this. So the author of this master thesis sent this thesis to the organizers, and they announced this. Oh, this might be problematic. It's controversial. We should come up with a controversial statement to this, and he did. So the organizers were saying, "Oh, well, we have to think about it, and thank you very much. This is thoughtful." And someone from the audience was yelling, "Oh, this is all bullshit." So this is the German take. So there is this. Some people discuss it. They're at the edge, I would say. And then there are some people who completely deny the importance of the discussion, and you're even not coming close to the discussion of why it could be problematic. It's not only that you have workers who might be slaves, or but also the practices. And then you have in so many more games where you don't have colonialism as such, but the representation of local communities, the exotization of others, that's a continuous thing, because exoticism is a selling point for the German publishers. They're not locating a lot of these issues to the German context or European context because it's not exotic enough. So there's a responsibility of the publishers to make it interesting. Yeah. So that's the task of the publishers, that a German context or something different could be interesting. So we have dogs, we have, fantasies. And so we have daily things, daily practices. University could be a perfect problematic, thing you could have as a narrative in a board game. So but if you deny, so such a person who is yelling, "This is all bullshit," is actually saying, we don't need to have this conversation because it's just a game. And people who talk about board games like you do, and Aaron Trammell does, or Marco Nudo, and so there are so many others who take it serious, or Mary Flanagan and Mikael Jakobsen, and so they take it serious and say, like, oh, it is a cultural product, and as such we have to treat it. And we do the same with books, and we do the same with music and with movies. Why don't we do this with board games? So it has a importance in daily life because it reproduces power structures, and it reproduces stigmatizations. It reproduces it legitimizes a lot of practices that people are tired of, and and suffering under it because of oppression and so on.
Yeah, so basically all those feelings of family that some people are getting, like they're not transferring to people who aren't allowed to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, it's yes, it is. So when you have this in the family, someone says, like, oh, we don't discuss this anymore. This is a very old-fashioned attitude that, this was very popular until the 1970s, after the Second World War, to deny, oh, we don't talk about it. We don't talk about problems, and there is no need to discuss this, and we shut this discussion down immediately. And you find these comments, similar comments, also in the internet. There's so many, reactions to Puerto Rico, or the former version of Sky Mines, which is Mombasa, and so on. There are so many comments by various people who say, "Oh, we don't need to have this discussion," and I never meant to do harm. And I think, yes, nobody wants to do harm, but if someone steps on your foot and say, "You are on my foot," you better leave. But if you remain standing, You don't care, and then you do harm.
Mm.
And I think you have to really think about and to listen to people who criticizing it. And it's not always black people. There's also other people who have different worldviews and perspectives. Um, yeah, I can see that board gamers judge games for the mechanics. I can see that many times. But this is a very a superficial argument, I think. If you think about, and I think it's Sabine Hara who speaks about identity tourism, when you are a colonialist invading another country and you don't want to be the oppressed person, you don't want to be the losers, I'm using quotation marks. You don't want to be the ones who are inferior because it's not so much fun. You want to
Right.
be the one who is conquering and who is succeeding and successful, and that's more fun apparently, because we want to deal with the positive feelings in cases you win.
So how do we get from, everyone's welcome, see, I told everyone they were welcome, to actual inclusivity? Like, what is the path to get us from where we are now to like what we say we want to be?
I think there is a thing. So, whom are you letting to your house? And then you ask, oh, how do I recruit new gamers? It does in a very small circles, it does on your daily basis. So, and I have a lot of people, they send around on eBay, they send around messages and asking for looking for new players. Sometimes they ask their neighbors, or they ask their parents of their children's friends and so on. Yeah. So they're asking people of their own kind. They're having they may have contact to people of different social backgrounds, but they're not inviting them to their homes. They are not creating relationships with them. So, and I think we have to create relationships, and then we can, and to think about, oh, I know the person who's running a convenience store. Convenience stores are not stigmatized in Germany as much as they are in the US. I know his person's name. Many times they're from the Middle East or from Turkey, but I don't know more, and I'm not inviting them to my house. I'm not asking them to be part of the board game round, and there is a spot empty or open, so someone could fit in. So who am I asking to join to fill that space? And if we always think about people of our own kind, which is convenient for the daily basis, I think we have to start there to think
Mhm.
about how do we actually make relationships with people of different social backgrounds, and do we invite them to our places, and are we open? You have to have a lot of openness. I have to have a lot of openness to join other people's homes, to invade. Somehow I'm invading the board game scene at the moment, to to be to become a part of the scene at the moment, which I'm doing. Openness, and I think is very helpful in general.
All right. So, with that, I think it's a good place to stop the serious conversation. We're going to have a couple of just little soft questions. One, I know you're not a board gamer, although I think anybody who plays games is a gamer. I have an open definition of this. What board game have you played during your research that you really, really did like?
I realized that I really hate Monopoly. I played a couple of times again.
See, now I know you're a gamer.
So I can see it now that it's really a shitty game, or it's there are better mechanics. What game have I played? Oh, I have played a children's game that I really liked. It's called, I think, Molehill. It's
Okay.
about moles. It's lovely. It's the only game I won at the board game cruise, because 4 days I played games for 4 days. I didn't win any game except this one. So I had a very good relationship to that game. I bought it for myself afterwards. I play it with my family. So it's a children's game. So I go very basic. I'm not into the Euro game so much because uh, I've I've played some games, but I what I'm not a fan of is like you're by yourself and after 2 hours you look up and you count your points and you realize, okay, your strategic plan didn't work out because you haven't considered so many things. I can see that intriguing and and interesting to see, but I'm more a social person. Yeah.
Yes, although what you described sounds great to me because I'm a solo gamer. But
Yeah. Well, I played Cascadia in the solo mode to be able to explain it to my brother. Yeah. Well, maybe I haven't played the right game yet. This is probably what the most listeners would say now. Oh, you haven't played this game. This will change your mind completely. Yes, yes. Send
of
it to
course,
me.
it'll happen one day. I tease, I tease. And then if people want to follow your work online, where can you be found, if anywhere?
You can find me on LinkedIn, looking for Cosima Werner, and you can always Google me, and you will find my homepage of the university, which is university-kiel.de/Cosima/Werner. I don't know exactly actually, but you can Google me. There are not so many Cosima Werners around that do research on board games.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Cosima, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been a
Thank
lovely
you, Liz.
conversation.
Thank
I
you
really
very much.
appreciate it.
Same. Thanks, and good luck for your continuing work. And I think it's very meaningful to have also the academic perspective on board games.
Working on it. All right, for everybody out there, if you want to find me online, I'm everywhere as Beyond Solitaire. And do please like, subscribe, comment, ask questions, and most of all, happy gaming.